Welcome back. So as we are getting ready to enter now the fourth quarter of the year, we are approaching holiday season. And, we've talked over the last few weeks about all the different stressors that we have going on, whether it's social unrest, COVID, or just the holidays by themselves. There's a lot of stress and a lot of mood-related things happening to folks. People become depressed a little bit more regularly during the holiday season. And so today we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about some strategies and some things to consider as it relates to dealing with some of these holiday related stressors and mood related symptoms.
Like three other Americans, you don't follow American football, right?
Correct.
Okay, so you don't know about the fourth quarter rituals. Okay. So there's this thing in American football, college football, where when the fourth quarter begins, the players will hold up four fingers like this is when the game is really decided. Right. And it reminds me of 2020 is a little bit like that. We're in the fourth quarter, right? And we've made it until the fourth quarter of this memorable year. Somebody said that about the Preakness yesterday. The Preakness? You don't watch horse racing either. I don't watch horse racing, but I heard an announcer say that a filly, a female, won the Preakness yesterday. And it's first time in around 50 years or something that a female horse won a major race, but one of the Triple Crown races. And he said, what else but 2020? It's like this is the year that would happen. Right. So here we are in the fourth quarter. We not only have 8 or 9 months of stress and illness and death and controversy, but now we're facing what for many people is the most difficult part of the year in a normal year.
Right.
With increased food and alcohol consumption and getting ready for the holidays. And we have an election this year. And so much is going to happen in the fourth quarter of this year. So we thought, well, let's take a look at it, because we know that anxiety and depression are probably going to continue to increase as we go through the year. Right. And so we thought, let's not only talk a little bit about what this year has brought to all of us, but also what we might do about it.
Right.
Before we begin, do you know the term coronaphobia?
The fear of getting corona?
Yeah. Now that's the term. That has become the official term. I saw an article from the UK and they said this has now an official term. It's called coronaphobia. It's all the feelings you have about corona. So we talked about corona fatigue and corona malaise last week, but now there's an official term that we're going to have to use, but there is a term out there.
Well, that's interesting, because usually with phobias, they use the Latin version of the word in some way. So I don't know what the Latin word for crown would be, because corona means crown, right?
Right.
That's not Latin, is it?
I don't know. I'd have to look.
Okay. I don't speak Latin, so.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, we're gonna talk about discover information from 3 different articles today. And the first one is really interesting because it talks about an interesting relationship, and we use that word relationship very importantly because it's not causal. We don't know if one causes the other or the other causes the one. We don't know. But this interesting relationship between mood regulation and depression.
Right.
And we talk about this a lot. Before we started recording, we were talking about how we discuss mood dysregulation a lot when it comes to children.
Children,
we don't
right.
necessarily talk about it as much with adults, but it is just as true and just as much of an issue in adults as it is with children, because our ability to regulate and manage our emotions really is a critical aspect as it relates to how we are functioning and how we present and how we are dealing with things in our world.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to a woman the other day, and we were discussing that very issue. I hadn't seen anything about mood regulation, but she said, "Well, how do you do that? How do you?" She said, "I just kind of give up every once in a while." And she said, "How how do these things happen to you and you don't get upended by them? The wheels don't fall off. You don't get upset. And that we were sort of talking about mood regulation. You have to learn, and it is a skill. It's not something you're just born with. Mood regulation is a skill that you have to learn. And so some of this article is speaking to therapists and telling them that you need to help your patients or clients learn how to regulate their mood. Okay. Because if you can't regulate your mood, if you don't have the ability to self-regulate, you're going to fall prey to anxiety, depression, panic, all those things. On the other hand, if you're depressed, it's very hard for you to regulate your mood because you are depressed. And so what this article did is it began with, in these days of, in the pandemic, people tend to be a little bit more depressed or a little more anxious, and that will interfere with mood regulation. Okay.
Right.
That's where this whole thing started.
Right. And it makes perfect sense because, you know, we know that, you know, one of the things that elevates our mood or makes us feel better is being social, interacting with other people,
That's right.
going out and moving and doing things. And so when we're isolated or quarantined, or we're, you know, just separated from everyone else, it makes it really difficult, even if we communicate with them. And, you know, we've been talking for years about the idea that social media is not really social, and how, you know, research was looking at, you know, the social media, those who participate in social media the most tend to describe themselves as the most lonely.
Right.
And this is a great example of that because, you know, many of us are isolated, and so we're only engaging people through social media, even if it's, you know, Zoom or whatever, but yet we're still experiencing a lot of depression. And I think there's that interesting relationship. And so, the first article talks about mood homeostasis and balancing our mood and keeping it regulated. And remember that mood is that underlying sort of base of how we feel, whereas our emotions are, you know, how we feel at any particular moment. And so a mood may last for days, whereas an emotion may last for minutes or, you know, hours or something. So, you know, we're talking about that underlying base emotion or base mood of how you feel at any particular time.
Yeah, I'd like to underline one of the things you just mentioned, because it's so important, and that is that we've been saying for years that just because your kids that social media is not a substitute for true personal interaction, person-to-person interactions. We've been saying that for years. And, you know, the kids are laughing at us saying, well, I am interacting and all that. We say, no, it's really not enough. You have to really have real person contact. And I think that's the lesson that's been driven home during the pandemic, is that you do miss person-to-person contact. You do miss sitting at a table close to somebody and talking to them. You do miss hugging. You do miss personal contact. Right. So I think the verdict is in on that one. And I think that's an excellent point to make, is that if we didn't learn anything else from this virus or this pandemic, we've learned that close personal contact is absolutely essential. And the more of it you have, the better you're going to feel. Okay?
Right.
That's a good point. But then the article goes on to say, but it is up to you, it is up to each of us to work to achieve this balance. In the article, they call it mood homeostasis. And our moods fluctuate from within a day, day to day, from week to week, month to month, different times of the year. Some people like the winter time, some people like bright sunlight. And so your mood is going to vary from time to time. So it's up to you to keep some sort of balance. Right. And what they advocate in this article is to choose to select a group of activities that you can use to regulate your mood.
Right. And it doesn't it doesn't have to be anything like we all should do this or we all should do that. Right. It's going to be person to person. It's going to be individualized to each person. And then we have to go from there. We have to decide from that moment, you know, what you're going to do, whether it's going to be like we talk about in the next article, yoga, or if it's going to be something different. You know, we have to choose that for ourselves.
That's right. And we've often said, and this is a this can be a sticking point in therapy. We say to people, if you are feeling down, if you're feeling depressed, that's the time when you have to get up, get off the sofa and do something.
Right.
And people will say, and there are articles written that say, well, I don't feel like doing that. That's not the time. And it just makes me feel worse when I think I have to do something.
Right.
You don't have to do anything monumental. Okay.
Right.
It doesn't require that you go out and climb mountains, but you have to know what kinds of things you can do, or what kinds of things you can use that will change your mood. If you're too, and we're not talking about just depression, but if you're too elevated, if you're getting too anxious, if you're getting too active, what can you do to calm yourself down? That's when people many people reach for food or drugs or alcohol to calm them down. That's not the activity that you should be engaging in. I learned years ago, I don't know, you coach soccer, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Does that calm you down? Does that you feel better when you do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I used to run every day, and I always felt better after I ran. Okay. Some people say, man, when I'm on the golf course, I'm completely relaxed. I just don't think about anything. Or some people do that with fishing. They say, when I'm on the boat fishing, when I'm standing on the bank of a lake, I'm perfectly happy.
Right.
Okay. So you have to find those things that work for you. Not everything works for everybody.
Yeah.
You have to find those activities that you really like to do, and you have to use those activities to regulate your mood.
Intentionally. You have to make it intentional activity.
Right.
Absolutely.
Now, there's a curious thing at the end of this article. They say that because it could be culture specific. It could be, people who come from high income countries, and they've done research on this. If you take high income countries, Canada, the United States, Germany, England, it seems as though people rely more on exercise to elevate their mood. Whereas in low income countries, people tend to rely more on religion or traditional, it doesn't have to be just religious. It could be mythology or feelings of how do I get myself down or up? What do I rely on? I remember in my family, we were probably from I guess my family would be a low income culture. They relied on religion. I mean, they would go to church, bad things would happen and they would go to church and they would pray and they would say rosaries and they would light candles and use their religion to regulate their moods. And you and I were always surprised. Years ago, there was a study done about locus of control, and that we were surprised to learn that people who tend to be more religious have higher scores on locus of control. They feel like they're more in charge. And I think what that research is saying is they're better able to regulate their mood using religion.
Absolutely. Now, part of that goes to our second article, which looks at those times when maybe your mood is or your energy levels are a little bit higher. So when you're anxious, when you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed or anxious, and it looks at the benefits of yoga. Now, yoga isn't for everyone. Let's go ahead and say that. Yoga is not for everyone. Everyone isn't interested in it, doesn't do it, and just like we talked about in the first article, it depends on what you're into. But this is an interesting article that shows that for many, yoga can be a very effective way for dealing with stress and anxiety. Because if you think about it, what yoga does is it slows you down. It slows you down to the point where you can relax a little bit, even though you're putting yourself in maybe some physically demanding poses and things like that. It does calm you, and it lowers some of that brain activity. In the very least for the short term.
That's right. This is I like this article. People tell me I should do yoga. They said, you have the personality, you'd love to do yoga. And you and I there are many people we've talked to who say, yoga has changed my life. It's made a huge difference in my life. But you're right. It's not for everybody. Okay. Some people will benefit, some won't. What yoga does, and I think martial arts did you ever do martial arts?
I did.
Okay. Yeah, I never did. I never had formal training. But one of the things that martial arts does is the forms, not the hitting and kicking, but the forms are very complicated,
Right.
aren't they?
It's
And you have to,
complicated, but the interesting thing is it's very rhythmic, and
right.
it's, you know, depending on the type you're doing, it's very flowing. Much like thinking about Tai Chi. Tai Chi always reminds me of sort of a martial arts yoga type of,
Yeah.
it's slow moving, it's fluid, and but yet it's, you know, lots of different.
Tai Chi is sort of the forms in martial arts.
Right.
I never thought about that, but you're right. That's the forms. What those do, you have to really focus and concentrate to
Right.
do those forms, right?
Yeah.
And I think what you're doing is you're getting your brain to calm down and focus on one thing, okay? And we talk about rhythmic breathing or controlled breathing in the Lamaze, childbirth, Tai Chi,
Right.
the forms in martial arts. All those things are designed to bring your brain to calm. We live in a stressful world. Even before COVID, we lived in a stressful world.
Right.
I remember how hectic things were before the shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
And so we live in this stressful world. And what you have to do, your brain is typically warming up or getting hot, getting anxious, getting aroused. And what you have to do is periodically, you have to force your brain back to calm. To
Right.
teach it, you have to teach your brain where you want it to be.
Right.
And yoga is one of the ways that you teach your brain how to get calm. It is a brain thing, okay? Because when you're doing yoga, A, you have to concentrate, B, you have to relax, C, you have to do things with your body that you don't typically do. And so you're forcing your brain to get to calm.
Right. Absolutely.
That's the advantage of yoga.
Yeah. And you can learn some of that stuff through cognitive behavioral therapy, which is effective for a lot of people. It's not effective for everyone.
Right.
But cognitive behavioral therapy helps with some of that as well. But again, yoga seems to be pretty effective for those who can do it. It's pretty effective, in the very least in the short term, in dealing with some of that, just to kind of bring you down when you need it.
Right. Yeah. And this was part of a study where they studied 3 types of stress reduction, you know, and CBT turned out to be the long term had the best effect.
Yeah.
Cognitive behavioral therapy, because it helps you to change your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that that's a pretty effective way of doing things.
Yeah.
That said, that only 50% of people benefit from medication or these therapies, okay?
Right.
Like cognitive behavioral therapy or psychotherapy. So you have to, because of that, because we know that only half of people are going to benefit, you have to be willing to do these other things. So here's an activity like yoga that fits into our first reading on mood stabilization and mood regulation. Here's a way to regulate your mood long term.
Right.
You don't have a panic attack and do yoga to get rid of the panic attack. You do yoga to just keep your brain calm day in, day out.
Right. Absolutely. And that very nicely leads us to the third article, which, especially as we're moving into the holidays, emphasizing just what we eat. You know, we talk about the 3 things: exercise, sleep, and diet. And so we've talked a little bit about exercise, but this one is about diet. And there are things that we do, particularly eating lots of sweets during the holidays, that has an effect on our mood. And so when we're thinking about regulating our mood and keeping it stable over time, one of the ways that we can do that is by being mindful of what we're eating. And, you know, eating too many sweets, which is something that we're, again, at risk for during this holiday season. If we're eating too many sweets, we're at risk for increasing mood dysregulation and having a difficult time handling some of those mood-related issues.
Right. You know, you hear a lot these days about inflammation,
right,
in your body, and the gut biome, keeping the gut biome healthy. You know, we take probiotics and prebiotics, and we have to treat the gut biome. Leslie Korn is now an even more well-known nutritionist. We interviewed her a couple of years ago, and I asked her the question about sugar, and she said, "Let me put it. This is the best way to think about it. You know how much it hurts when you stub your toe?" And she said, when you consume sugar every day, it's like you've stubbed your toe, and every day you stub that same toe over again And that's the kind of inflammation that sugar produces in your body. What these authors are arguing is that at this time of the year, fourth quarter, holiday preparations, three things are happening. Number one, there's less sunshine.
Right.
And so you have seasonal affective disorder. Second, you have changes because of daylight savings time and Eastern Standard Time and all that, you begin to switch your sleep cycle, sleep patterns that can be disrupted, okay? And the third is that you have increased sugar consumption because pumpkin pie and cranberry sauce and cookies and all that stuff, and increased alcohol consumption. And increased alcohol is like sugar, okay? So you have these three changes that occur in the fourth quarter, and it becomes a perfect storm to wreck your gut biome. So what you're doing is you're creating the very inflammation that creates mood disorders. Right? And sugar is a major culprit.
It's like, they've talked about it many times now as being somewhat like a drug that, once you start consuming it, it's like you don't want to stop. You just keep going. And, we won't talk about it in the form of an addiction or anything like that, but from an evolutionary perspective, our body wants and needs sugar. So when you start to consume sugar, your body wants more sugar because, from a biological perspective, it says, I don't know when I'll get this much sugar again, so I better consume as much as I can, and then we'll store it away as when we store it away as fat. And, then that's that cycle that gets going.
Right. And I didn't realize that 30% of the population has some form of winter depression. I lived up north for years, and my mood changed in wintertime. It was a lack of sunshine. You couldn't go out. You were locked in your house. And even if it was a happy house, you were still locked in. I mean, and my mother talked about that, having raised 5 children, and she would have to be shut in for months at a time because and it had an effect on her mood. So your mood, you have this dip in your mood at the end when holidays arrive. And when you are in a depressed state, you crave carbohydrates because carbohydrates elevate your mood. They act on serotonin. And so at the very time when you shouldn't, when you're craving it, it's more available because now you're entering that. You have Halloween in October, you have Thanksgiving in November, and you have the other holidays in, Christmas and Hanukkah and all the other holidays in December. So you have 3 months in a row where you have sweet laden holidays. And so that, while it makes you feel good initially, as soon as you eat sugar, you get a boost in your mood. But over the long term, you're creating the inflammation that makes you depressed.
Right.
Absolutely. Because you're ruining your gut biome.
Absolutely. And so we really need to be mindful of how much sugar we're consuming and regulate that, because that's going to help us regulate our mood.
That's right. And when we normally think about inflammation, the inflammation that's created by increased sugar intake, we typically think of physical diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and diabetes and those sorts of things. We don't typically associate it with disruptions in mood. But when you have systemic inflammation, the kind of thing that alcohol and sugar do to your body, it is going to affect your mood. We talk about it all the time, the gut-brain connection. Absolutely. And if you wreck your gut biome, which is what's going to happen with increased alcohol and sugar consumption, if you aggravate or change that gut biome, it's going to have an effect on your mood. So we have to be very careful about that. In fact, there are parasitic, what this research points out is there are parasitic gut microbes that want sugar and almost turn it into poison in your body. Okay, so much of your gut biome is healthy and helpful, but there are microbes in there that want this sugar, and they're going to turn it into an enemy that's going to react and act on you physically and emotionally. So if you want to regulate your mood, as we said in the first article, if you want mood regulation, you got to be very, very careful about increased sugar and alcohol intake during the last quarter.
Absolutely. So as we enter these last 3 months, let's work to regulate our mood by doing those things that you find mood stabilizing, whether it's bringing your mood down, like yoga, in the second article, bringing that anxiety down, or doing something to improve your mood, things that that make you happy and that you enjoy. And then being mindful of how what we eat is going to affect the way that we feel and our overall mood. Again, as we're entering into these holidays when, there's a lot of temptation out there. So
as a general guideline, 25 grams of added sugar per day. If you're looking for, well, how much sugar is okay, up to 25 grams per day. I don't know what that translates into.
Please don't drink a Mountain Dew.
Oh,
Mountain Dew.
Soda. Never mind. I won't get started. Okay.
All right. Well, that is it then for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.